Um, this morning, our topic is accommodating a lesson plan for diverse learners. Hold on, I'm managing several things here. I'm so sorry, y'all. Okay, we have lots of people joining, which is excellent. And I want to make sure everybody's here. All right. So we're so glad that you're here and excited about this conversation, and that hopefully it sparks some new ideas, or you're just thinking about how you're going to apply this to your own lesson planning and lesson plan support. So for those of you who don't know us, we are the Diverse Learners Cooperative. Our mission is to connect teachers and leaders with the professional learning resources and networks they need to improve outcomes for diverse learners, for our students with disabilities, for our multilingual learners, for our learners who need something different. And part of that mission too is to increase our teacher and leader retention. We know that when teachers feel more equipped and empowered to serve their diverse learners, they want to stay in the classroom longer. And we know teachers who stay longer do better for kids. So that is our mission, and we're so glad to have you here today. Mary and I are going to co-host this morning. Mary's going to be our Think Aloud, and we're going to take on a third grade lesson plan and accommodate that for y'all. So first we'll think aloud the process, talk about considerations, and then share with you some resources that you can take away from this morning's conversation. So the process when we're thinking about accommodating a lesson involves these 4 steps. First, we need to identify the clear goal that we're trying to achieve with our lesson. We need to understand our students and their needs. We need to identify potential barriers that those students may meet in this particular lesson toward this goal, and then implement strategies to break down those barriers.
Okay, so we're going to jump into an example that we're going to look at today. Often when we think about accommodating our lessons, it's a little bit simpler for us sometimes to think about, for our multilingual students, a reading lesson or a writing lesson, because those are domains that they need support with. But today we're going to look at a math lesson, because often we're unaware of how much reading, writing, speaking, listening that is happening in all the subject areas. So we're going to dig into one of these today to think about some ways we can support our students in these different domains, additionally with some other students and some barriers that other students may face in our class as well. I'm going to take you on a quick tour of this lesson. So this is an achievement first lesson, and I chose this because I know that this is a curriculum that quite a few schools are using, and so this is one way. Hopefully the format is not unfamiliar to you. Maybe it's something that you can look at. So we go through, it has the aims and the goals at the beginning. I've got some examples of the work that students might be doing. This walks us through the lesson itself with some questions as they're going. I don't have the whole lesson screenshot on the slides, which is why I'm kind of walking you through it now. And then it has the materials at the end. This is the work time, there's some individual practice, and then there's an exit ticket at the end. So we're going to look at a few of these pieces, but I wanted you to get a vision of the whole thing together. So in this lesson, the first question that we're going to ask, and the first thing we're going to think about when we're hoping to accommodate the lesson, is what's the goal of the lesson? What are students going to be able to do, and how will they show it? So to answer the first question, I'm going to look right here. I see that it says AIM, and it says, I think M is for mathematicians will be able to, and their goal is to be able to recognize parts of a whole as equivalent if they're the same size, not just the same shape, which is a kind of tricky standard. Then our next thing that we're going to think about, how are they going to show it? And I'm going to find that down here. So basically, they're going to show what they know by drawing and writing about equivalent fractions. The next thing I'm going to think about are my students. So what do I know about the audience for my lesson? What are their strengths and their experiences? What might they need? So I have here a class WIDA chart that when I work with my students, I break all of their levels down and I put their individual scores in each domain. So I have all of their listening scores here, their speaking scores, reading and writing. This really helps me get a feel for what I'm going to need to do whole class and what my students as a whole might be needing. So when I look at this, there's a few takeaways I have. First, I'm looking In this 3 column right here, level 3, that's where the majority of my students are. So when I'm thinking about appropriate supports and can-dos and performance definitions for WIDA, a lot of them are going to fall in that level 3 category. The next thing that I'm going to be thinking about is this right here. So I'm thinking about reading. I don't have any students that are in this proficient and advanced category. So a lot of my students are going to need some reading support. So that's just something for me to keep in mind as I'm planning. The next piece is here. I have this same student who is in this level 1 area for speaking and reading. So I'm going to definitely need to be thinking about how that student is going to benefit from additional reading and speaking support. Then I'm going to think about, I have these 2 other students down here. So student S needs additional support with executive functioning skills. And so he's going to benefit from organizational structures that might help him walk through the lesson. And then student R has a specific learning disability. And she has a really, I know her, so she has a really strong math brain, but she's going to need some support showing her work with writing. Once I have an understanding of my students, I can think about what are the barriers that these students in this class might face with this lesson. So I've got some screenshots here from the lesson, and we're going to talk through some of the barriers that might be presented. So the first thing I think about are, I see there's some specific vocabulary words that are going to trip them up potentially. So equivalent, I need to think about how that is going to be perceived. We use that a lot. Comparisons, those are some words that, might be challenging for them. The next thing I'm going to look at, I see this word problem and I'm seeing a lot of words that are there. I see several sentences. And so some students might need these problems read aloud fully or partially. I also am thinking about how they're asking students to draw things in the lesson, draw diagrams, things like that. And some students may have trouble drawing the fraction bars or the graphs on their paper to make sure that they're equivalent. That's a challenging skill, especially organizationally, organizing my thoughts on the paper. Another challenge that I might think about when I'm looking at this question and the exit ticket question are 2-step problems. And so this might trip up some students that need some support with organization. So I'm going to make sure that I have something in place to support them. Also, one of my students, that level 1 student, might have a barrier to reading some of the questions and discussing some of the prompts because there's quite a few things that keep popping up that are text heavy. Once I have all those barriers in my mind, I've kind of gone through the lesson, I think through, what's in the way potentially. As you're thinking through those, you're already kind of coming up with strategies as you're talking about that. So now it's time to put those in place. So what are the pathways that the content needs to have so that students can be prepared for the lesson? So when I'm thinking about that, I'm going to do a couple of different things. So right here, after the aim and all the introduction, I'm going to preview the vocabulary and I'm going to add some visual supports. The next thing I'm going to do is in this section where they have that problem with there's some pies that they need to draw and then divide into parts. For all of my students, I'm going to give them actual pie pieces, or if we're virtual, I'm going to take them to a math manipulative site that has some virtual models so that they're not having to organize that on their paper. I'm also going to provide students with manipulative fraction bars. They're going to be available to all my students at their tables or online so that they can use them as they decide is necessary. The next thing I'm going to do is I see there's partner work in this lesson. And so I'm going to put on the chat and I'm going to put on the board and I'm going to put on the papers and I'm going to prompt students with some discussion stems for partner work so that they can successfully have those conversations with their partner. As I'm thinking about the workshop time that students are going through, I'm going to think about the next challenges that they might have. I'm going to do some sentence stems for their written responses, and I'm going to write those directly on the student work paper and then make those copies so that everybody has access to them. Not every student is going to use them, but some students will, and that's what's available to them. We just want them to have the choice, the option, and to have it there for support if they need it. The next thing is I'm going to make sure that I strategically partner my students, specifically thinking about students that might have some challenges with discussions in English. So I'm going to strategically partner them so that they can have access to a same language peer who can help them support their thinking. That's going to keep them from having a barrier to this work or that discussion. And this next part, I'm going to think about the independent practice. How can I support them? And I'm going to include on the paper, just like I did with the sentence stems, a multi-step materials or a multi-step problem checklist that they can do and put it on the side next to their exit ticket and the questions that have more than one step, so that we make sure the students are getting all the parts. We'd hate for them to miss points or questions or not understand just because they did just the first part or just the last part. So that was a total flyby of this process of going through the goals, looking at my students, identifying the barriers, and then putting some strategies in place. The key consideration here is that this is what I would do. It's a puzzle piece, right? So we're thinking about these specific students with the specific experiences that they have for this specific lesson. So it's just one lesson in a sequence. It may be different for other lessons, or looking at multiple lessons in a row is going to give me more opportunities to make the content accessible. But this is what these students are going to need right now. I'm also going to work with my co-teacher to implement these strategies. And so I would think about using a co-planning protocol to support that conversation, which we have linked for you, an example of one that you could do. And just as a reminder, the thinking that we're doing this whole time is what's necessary for one is beneficial often for all. And so there is no reason that we can't provide all of these supports, all of these strategies for all of our students. And then we've got some additional resources here. And I think, Brooke, do you want to jump in and talk about some of these too?
Yeah, so on the top left, the 5, 15, 45 tool is if you have 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 45 minutes to plan with your co-teacher, this gives you an agenda. It also provides a script for that kind, like an example of that kind of conversation. So that we found is a really useful tool. Also in the bottom middle, there's another co-planning protocol that we've been working on with teams. On the left there, I'm going really out of order here, but that's okay. The accommodated and modified materials example. So this is an example that we created. It's the same lesson materials 3 times. The first one is the original, the second one is accommodated, and the third one is modified for our students with more significant learning needs. So that just gives you a visual of what this might look like on the materials. We did it digitally, meaning we added things on the computer, but you could do so many of these things just by handwriting as you were going around the classroom, or handwriting and then copying for your students when we are back in person. On the top right, of course, is the CAST UDL Learning Hub, and there's so many great resources there, and a lot of the strategies that we talked about really directly tie to an aspect of UDL. And then on the bottom right is a virtual math manipulatives dashboard. It's beautifully created, and whoever did that, but it's linked there for your resource too. We'll send the slides along to you after this chat, and then we are going to take some time for questions. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll stop sharing and we'll open up the conversation, but we'd love to know if this was helpful, or if there are other like grade levels or subject areas that you would find useful as another kind of model. If you could throw that in the chat, that would be really helpful for our future planning. And then next week's coffee chat is on simultaneous teaching. And Josh will be leading us through that and thinking about, as we return to school, if we have students that are virtual and in person, what are some best practices for managing our time and our caseloads there. So with that, whoops, it went away from me today. There we go. I'm stopping the recording.